Good afternoon and welcome to these last few sessions of the ROCK Final Conference. We had in these days and also today very interesting discussions and a lot of participants and keynotes on the different panels as well as in the exhibition. Now we have the opportunity to discuss with one of our project partners, Julie's Bicycle, and to understand something more about sustainability and sustainable cultural events. I am Saveria Boulanger, fellow researcher at the University of Bologna. I have worked on the ROCK project since the beginning, and I am expert of smart and sustainable cities. So I am really pleased to be the chair of this session and to present you Lucy Latham, who will give you some insights on sustainable cultural events. Lucy joined Julie's Bicycle in 2013 to work with key cultural actors in the UK and internationally, delivering research, training, consultancy, and advocating for the strategic integration of environmental and climate action within the cultural economy. Thank you, Lucy, for being here. I invite you to join me on the floor, and I invite you to share your presentation with us.
Thank you very much, Saveria. I hope you can hear me and see me. So welcome to today's session, Leave a Trace, Not a Footprint, a guide for cities to address environmental impact of cultural events. This is the name of my presentation and also the name of the guide within which I am introducing to you today. And as Saveria said, my name is Lucy and I work for an organisation called Julie's Bicycle, who works at the intersection of culture and sustainability. And our website is full of resources and case studies. So please take a look, follow us on social media, and it would be great to discuss this issue further. So I just wanted to first, as I said, introduce this guide. It was written in partnership with Eurocities, another of the ROCK partners, and we work together to collate this content and to collate the case studies which are featured. And hopefully you can see there on the left hand side is just a snapshot of the contents page, but that introduces the key issues that this report talks about, the key environmental impacts which relate also to the production of events and of cultural events, particularly cultural events in cities. And on the right hand side, you can see all of the case studies that we include in this report as well. So as I mentioned, we worked with Eurocities to look at a mixture of ROCK members cities and other cities to really try and demonstrate just where good practice was happening across Europe in the sustainable city events world. But today I'm just going to try and give you a flavour for the content because it is a really rich and informative guide and we'd love you to read it. And I'm only going to be able to scratch the surface, but on the links you can see that's where you can access the full report, and we can drop a link in the chat box as well so you can all access it really easily. So one of the first impacts that we're going to talk about here, and that is described far more fully in the guide, is energy. And energy is really one of the main impacts of events, especially some of these very high production events that involve music and shows, or maybe feature a range of partners that are using energy if they're serving food or drinks. So it's a really key impact. And as I go through these impacts, what I'm going to focus on is a kind of methodology or approach that you can take to organizing your actions or your response. So when we think about energy in terms of sustainable events, it really helps to start with what's called the power management hierarchy. And the power management hierarchy is a way to kind of organize your thinking from the top priority to the lowest priority, or where to really begin. Um, so you can just take a look there. Oops, sorry. But there are some really key things that you sort of principles that is worth knowing when it comes to energy. So, firstly, when it comes to thinking about your power procurement, you want to think about where that power is coming from and how you can deliver it in a more efficient way. So that might be more efficient light bulbs like LEDs. It might be around how you manage your consumption. And you can procure all different kinds of generators that have different kinds of efficiency functionality, or generators that actually help you record your energy consumption. So monitoring with all environmental impacts is really critical in terms of understanding impact and being able to develop reduction strategies. And there's now all kinds of technologies related to generators that help you store this kind of data of use, which you can then work with your power provider to help establish a baseline and come up with a reduction strategy in future events or future years. I would also say, when it comes to thinking about top principles, consider what kind of energy source. So if you are using generators, you could think about moving to biodiesel from diesel, or better yet, mains grid electricity, or better yet, mains grid electricity that comes from renewable resources, like photovoltaic panels, for example. So that's a kind of introduction to energy. And as you'll see in the report, there are lots of great case studies that really illustrate good energy management in practice. One example here is the Showman's Show. This is actually a case study not included in the report. It's an additional bit of information, but it's a really nice example for demonstrating how effective monitoring is. So you can see here on the left-hand side just what happened when Showman's Show used generators with that energy monitoring functionality, and then used that information to reduce its consumption by over 50%. So this case study really demonstrates the power of data and how you use that in your decision making. I also wanted to just include this slide as a demonstrator of energy, where energy sits as a priority for festival producers. Now, this survey is only looking at UK festival producers, but it's a really useful report, and I really encourage you to read it if you are in the festival business, because it uses a lot of insights from a range of festival providers who've been working in sustainability for a while. And it pulls together a lot of data. And you can see in the infographic how that data is presented in a very engaging way. It also pulls out the top issues for festival producers. And at number one, we can see there in the corner is energy management. So another key impact for events is that of waste. Festivals can produce a huge amount of waste. If you've ever seen photographs of the day after Glastonbury, you will know just how much waste, tent waste, is produced. So going back to the hierarchy, how can we use the hierarchy as an approach to think about material use and waste? So you always want to start from the beginning point of minimization and prevention. So a lot of people, when they're thinking about waste, think about how are we going to recycle? Well, there are two steps before you even get to recycling. And those steps are reusing. So how do you use materials before even thinking about disposing of them? And minimization. Now, minimization is really a point about procurement, and we are going to touch on procurement because, as you could imagine, procurement and waste are actually very much interconnected. And we can think about waste through our procurement processes and challenge ourselves when we're buying in materials to think, do we need it? Could we use something else? Could we reuse something else? Challenging the kind of more is more aesthetic that sometimes we see in production. And we've got some great case studies that talk about waste. So you can see Manchester International Festival. This festival used a variety of environmental management systems to really focus on achieving against its environmental action plan. And when it comes to waste, it's been very successful in that only 1% of waste is now going to landfill. So that's a really high achievement. You can see one of the stats at the bottom there, 92% of sets and props were recycled and reused. So as I mentioned before, procurement, how can we think about procurement? Well, I wanted to include this kind of spotlight on materials because obviously we do have to buy things for the events and for the kind of productions that we're putting on. But what I've included here is a sort of set of questions that we can ask ourselves when thinking about procuring materials. Thinking about where they are sourced, i.e., are they local? And does that mean that the transportation impact is less? And in fact, how are they transported? Could they be couriered on a bicycle, or are they coming on a car or a private jet? All of these have environmental impact implications. So thinking about locality and the transport is really important. You can also think about construction, what kind of materials they might contain, and use those questions to inform your approach to procurement and develop a procurement policy. Now we have transport. So it's not just about transportation of you as an event organizer or your staff or maybe the artists that you're working with. You might also think about transport of audiences. Now, in the case of city events, perhaps we are so lucky that our city event is in the centre and you have good public transport links, in which case transport might not be so much of an issue. However, it can really help to do things like communicate public transport options or maybe incentivize public transport options, for example, by providing a discount through ticket sales. But we can use the hierarchy again to think about our approach for reducing travel and transport. So again, following quite a sort of similar idea to some of the hierarchies that we've been introduced to in the earlier slides. But number one is always around measuring. So how, before you can even think about reducing an impact, you need to measure it. You need to understand what you're working with. Where does that impact exist? Is it audience travel? Is it artist travel? Is it the freight of production materials? That understanding builds up a picture to create your strategy. And then, just like when we were looking at the waste hierarchy, the first step is to avoid or to minimize. Rather than thinking about doing things differently, how can we actually reduce the kind of transportation? Could we do something around communicating, walking or cycling? And then we've got reduce. So how can we think about increasing efficiency? Maybe it's by using buses which use biodiesel or a lighter kind of energy source. That also kind of crosses over with step 4, which is thinking about, again, how can we swap high carbon sources for low carbon sources. So that might be speaking to the transport mode, like can we move from single cars to buses and coaches, or it might be the fuel that's used if we do need to resort to land-based travel. And then lastly, at number 5 is offset. And actually, you could apply the offset as well to the energy hierarchy. And offsetting is really for when you've done the most that you possibly can in improving your impact, then you offset the things that can't be mitigated. And offsetting is all about having a price for carbon and then using that money that it would be the equivalent to your carbon impact and investing it in a kind of activity that seeks to absorb that same amount of carbon. So you might often see a tree planting scheme. I would like to add, because offsetting is quite popular, that it is has a lot of challenges. A lot of the kind of projects involved in offsetting don't necessarily actually do much environmental good. So you have to be really critical if you're thinking about an offsetting plan. But Julie's Bicycle is producing a new guideline for carbon offsetting. So if you join our mailing list, you will find out when that document becomes live. So I think I might be toward the end of my presentation. So I'd be very happy to answer questions or talk about any of these issues further.
Thank you, Lucy, for your very, very interesting presentation. I also think that you give us really very useful methodology also to understand how we can effectively mitigate those impacts when we organize or also we participate to events, because often we do not think about all of that impacts, but we just think about maybe few, maybe someone is more aware about transportation, some other people are more aware for energy. So I think it is very, very interesting. Also the idea that it is not always needed to completely change the way in which we are doing things, but sometimes it is just also starting from trying to minimizing and reducing, starting thinking about what we can do, because sometimes it is harder to say we have to completely switch on another completely different way on doing things, while starting thinking in reducing can somehow have a lot of impacts and more impact than expected. So in relation with that, I also invite our audience. We have around 5 minutes for the Q&A. So if someone from the audience wants to ask some question, you can use the chat or the Q&A box. I will start and then I will check this box. I have one question for you, which is linked with the key partners to be involved in this typology of approaches, because cities can be very different, the local context can be very relevant. So I was wondering, in your opinion, which are the key partners that an organizer need to involve since the beginning?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question. I think the sort of specifics of the key partners are really going to differ depending on your city, the kind of cultural and geographic makeup. But I would say, you know, starting from that point of understanding, again, understanding is the key word here, of local context is really important, because it's about bringing people, whoever your key partners are, with you on that journey. They might be local businesses, they might be local interest groups, they may be other people within city departments or key cultural organizations or artists. There is a whole range of people who may be interested in doing this work with you. I think at the moment, sort of in response also to COVID-19, there is an increased sort of interest in moving away from outreach and instead to co-creation. And that's really part of the kind of impetus, I think, behind working with local partners is how can you develop strategies in collaboration, co-creating ideas with them so that they're more bought in and then more likely to follow the kind of actions implemented. But you're also giving over power and you're empowering the people that you're working with to think about how sustainability may apply, yes, to this event, but also to their own personal lives and to their own working lives. And it really is about having kind of conversations. You know, how do you start with questions rather than giving people the ideas? And I think this has been done in a number of cities to really good effect. For example, in New York, the City of New York, when they were developing their culture strategy and they were thinking about what that consultation process should be, they had to ask themselves, you know, where are the people? Rather than asking people to come to us, we need to go to where they are, to the barbershops, to sports halls. And they thought about the different kind of interventions that they could use to engage people. So they had their deputy mayor for culture in a ping pong tournament with local people where they would talk about issues of culture and what was important to them. And I think that philosophy really actually applies in this context as well.
Thank you. And also what we have seen with Rock Project is that effectively doing co-creation always give you new insights and also new points of view in things that we thought at the beginning were on one way, but in reality, when you do co-creation or you speak with people, at the end, you see that things are really, really different. So also in relation with the new Green Deal, it is important to involve really citizens and to directly go toward them instead of asking them to come. So it is really, I think that your point is really, really interesting. I think that we have time for just one more question. And Serena is asking, what are the key factors in your opinion for making this action or this typology of action or this implementation of methodology really impactful? So we already spoke about involving people. Is there any other key factors that you think important?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at Julie's Bicycle, we've ran a number of kind of policy interventions. One of the most notable ones is our partnership with our national cultural funder, Arts Council England. And everyone who receives funding from Arts Council England has to report against various environmental criteria. Now, the policy intervention is where you might think the impact is, but that policy would be unsuccessful if it didn't have a really strong support structure surrounding it. So the fact that people within the sector have access to new knowledge, to training opportunities, that there are networks and communities of practice that support people to engage with this material and also learn from each other. So the support structure is really important when we think about how we turn good practice into policy. We also need to ensure that there is resource, there is budget. That might be budget within the city. It might be budget to support greener culture, available to artists and to sector organizations to buy greener products or services or infrastructure. I think also in terms of impact, we always need to demonstrate demand from the top. So the need for governance and leadership to keep sustainability on the agenda. And then I think lastly, that's really important is that we think about environment as a joined up conversation with all kinds of other issue areas, whether it's social inclusion, whether it is just social justice, whether it is health, or local transport or health, well-being. All these agenda are interconnected.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. We are running out of time, so I'm really sorry for the other questions. I invite you to check eventually the chat if you want to answer in a written form, or I also invite the audience to contact eventually Lucy through the chat of the conference in case you have more questions, because we had a very interesting question about how to encourage businesses to prioritize environmental sustainability. But unfortunately, we are really on overdue time. So I will have to close this session. So thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I also thank the public for their participation and their very interesting questions. And I remember to everybody that in 4 or 5 minutes, so at 4 o'clock, we will have the closing plenary in another virtual room that will be the ending of this very interesting conference. So I really invite you all to participate, because also the municipality of Bologna, together with the Theatre of Bologna, has prepared a really very nice surprise for everybody. So I really invite you to share with us this moment. So thank you, Lucy, and thank you to the public, and have a nice ending of the conference. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.